Chapter 7. On arriving in Moscow by a morning train, Levin had put up at the house of his elder half-brother Koznishev. After changing his clothes, he went down to his brother's study, intending to talk to him at once about the object of his visit and to ask his advice. But his brother was not alone. With him there was a well-known professor of philosophy who had come from Kharkov expressly to clear up a difference that had arisen between them on a very important philosophical question. The professor was carrying on a hot crusade against materialists. Sergey Koznishev had been following this crusade with interest, and after reading the professor's last article, he had written him a letter stating his objections. He accused the professor of making too great concessions to the materialist, and the professor had promptly appeared to argue the matter out. The point in discussion was the question then in vogue. Is there a line to be drawn between psychological and physiological phenomena in man? And if so, where? Sergey Ivanovitch met his brother with the smile of chilly friendliness he always had for everyone, and introducing him to the professor, went on with the conversation. A little man in spectacles, with a narrow forehead, tore himself from the discussion for an instant to greet Leven, and then went on talking without paying any further attention to him. Levin sat down to wait till the professor should go, but he soon began to get interested in the subject under discussion. Levin had come across the magazine articles about which they were disputing, and had read them, interested in them as a development of the first principles of science, familiar to him as a natural science student of the university. But he had never connected these scientific deductions as to the origin of man as an animal, as to reflex action, biology, and sociology, with those questions as to the meaning of life and death to himself, which had of late been more and more often in his mind. As he listened to his brother's argument with the professor, he noticed that they connected these scientific questions with those spiritual problems, that at times they almost touched on the latter, but every time they were close upon what seemed to him their chief point, they promptly beat a hasty retreat and plunged again into a sea of subtle distinctions, reservations, quotations, allusions, and appeals to authorities, and it was with difficulty that he understood what they were talking about. "I cannot admit it," said Sergey Ivanovitch, with his habitual clearness, precision of expression, and elegance of phrase. "I cannot in any case agree with Kais that my whole conception of the external world has been derived from perceptions. The most fundamental idea, the idea of existence, has not been received by me through sensations. Indeed, there is no special sense organ for the transmission of such an idea." "Yes, but they, Wirt and Nost, they would answer you that your consciousness of existence is derived from the conjunction of all your sensations, that consciousness of existence is the result of your sensations. Wirt, indeed, says plainly that, assuming there are no sensations, it follows that there is no idea of existence." "I maintain the contrary," began Sergey Ivanovitch. But here it seemed to Levin that just as they were close upon the real point of the matter, they were again retreating, and he made up his mind to put a question to the professor. "According to that, if my senses are annihilated, if my body is dead, I can have no existence of any sort?" he queried. The professor, in annoyance, and as it were mental suffering at the interruption, looked round at the strange inquirer, more like a bargeman than a philosopher, and turned his eyes upon Sergey Ivanovitch, as though to ask, "What's one to say to him?" But Sergey Ivanovitch, who had been talking with far less heat and one-sidedness than the professor, and who had sufficient breadth of mind to answer the professor, and at the same time comprehend the simple, natural point of view from which the question was put, smiled and said, "That question we have no right to answer as yet." "We have not the requisite data," chimed in the professor, and he went back to his argument. No, he said, I would point out the fact that if perception is based on sensation, then we are bound to distinguish sharply between these two conceptions. Leven listened no more and simply waited for the professor to go. Chapter 8. When the professor had gone, Sergey Ivanovich turned to his brother. Delighted that you've come. For some time, is it? How's your family getting on? Levin knew that his elder brother took little interest in farming and only put the question in deference to him, so he only told him about the sale of his wheat and money matters. Levin had meant to tell his brother of his determination to get married and to ask his advice. He had indeed firmly resolved to do so. But after seeing his brother, listening to his conversation with the professor, hearing afterwards the unconsciously patronizing tone in which his brother questioned him about agricultural matters, their mother's property had not been divided, and Levin took charge of both their shares. Levin felt that he could not for some reason begin to talk to him of his intention of marrying. He felt that his brother would not look at it as he would have wished him to. Well, how is your district council doing? Asked Sergey Ivanovich, who was greatly interested in these local boards and attached great importance to them. I really don't know. What? Why, surely you're a member of the board. No, I'm not a member now. I resigned, answered Levin, and I no longer attend the meetings. What a pity, commented Sergey Ivanovich, frowning. Levin, in self-defense, began to describe what took place in the meetings in his district. That's how it always is, Sergey Ivanovich interrupted him. We Russians are always like that. Perhaps it's our strong point, really, the faculty of seeing our own shortcomings, but we overdo it. We comfort ourselves with irony, which we always have on the tip of our tongues. All I say is, give such rights as our local self-government to any other European people. Why, the Germans or the English would have worked their way to freedom from them, while we simply turned them into ridicule. But how can it be helped? Said Levin penitently. It was my last effort, and I did try with all my soul. I can't. I'm no good at it. It's not that you're no good at it, said Sergey Ivanovich. It's that you don't look at it as you should. Perhaps not, Levin answered dejectedly. Oh, do you know brother Nikolay's turned up again? This brother Nikolay was the elder brother of Konstantin Levin and half-brother of Sergey Ivanovich, a man utterly ruined, who had dissipated the greater part of his fortune, was living in the strangest and lowest company, and had quarreled with his brothers. What did you say? Levin cried with horror. How do you know? Prokofy saw him in the street. Here? In Moscow? Where is he? Do you know? Levin got up from his chair, as though on the point of starting off at once. I am sorry I told you, said Sergey Ivanovich, shaking his head at his younger brother's excitement. I sent to find out where he is living, and sent him his IOU to Trubin, which I paid. This is the answer he sent me. And Sergey Ivanovich took a note from under a paperweight and handed it to his brother. Levin read in the queer, familiar handwriting. I humbly beg you to leave me in peace. That's the only favor I ask of my gracious brothers. Nikolay Levin. Levin read it, and without raising his head stood with the note in his hands opposite Sergey Ivanovich. There was a struggle in his heart between the desire to forget his unhappy brother for the time and the consciousness that it would be base to do so. He obviously wants to offend me, pursued Sergey Ivanovitch. But he cannot offend me, and I should have wished with all my heart to assist him, but I know it's impossible to do that. Yes, yes, repeated Levin. I understand and appreciate your attitude to him, but I shall go and see him. If you want to, do, but I shouldn't advise it, said Sergey Ivanovitch. As regards myself, I have no fear of your doing so. He will not make you quarrel with me. But for your own sake, I should say you would do better not to go. You can't do him any good. Still, do as you please. Very likely I can't do any good, but I feel, especially at such a moment, but that's another thing, I feel I could not be at peace. Well, that I don't understand, said Sergey Ivanovitch. One thing I do understand, he added. It's a lesson in humility. I have come to look very differently and more charitably on what is called infamous, since brother Nikolay has become what he is. You know what he did. Oh, it's awful, repeated Leven. After obtaining his brother's address from Sergey Ivanovitch's footman, Levin was on the point of setting off at once to see him, but on second thought he decided to put off his visit till the evening. The first thing to do to set his heart at rest was to accomplish what he had come to Moscow for. From his brother's, Levin went to Oblonsky's office, and on getting news of the Shtcherbatskys from him, he drove to the place where he had been told he might find Kitty.